Continuing with First John this morning. We're in chapter 2. That's where we left off. And it's been a little while, but last time we looked at verses 12 through 14, and we looked at the concept of growth, and John is pointing out that different Christians are at different points in their growth. And some have learned to put more into practice more consistently than others, and that's to be expected. We all start from the beginning and learn and grow and gain more experience. Now he's going to move in verse 15 to speaking some about the world. And so our focus here for the next few sessions is going to be looking at some of these things, looking at the world, particularly verses 15 and 16, and then or 15 through 17, and then in 18 he will mention Antichrist, and we'll talk about that some in the future. I had planned on kind of getting through 15 through 17 more or less, but the longer I worked on it, the longer the notes became, and so we're going to split this up and today focus on defining the world a little bit. What is John referring to? And then in verse 16, he's going to name some things that are in the world, and we'll look at those a little bit. And so this morning, the goal is to give some definition to what John is talking about with the world. And he's referring to the world system here, and so we'll look at that. So let's read in First John chapter 2. We'll read 15 through 17. 1 John 2:15 says, "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lusts of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever." And so, in this passage, John speaks of the world, and I want to be clear about what the world is. What is he referring to here? Because much like in English, with the English word world, it can mean some different things depending on context. We can use it in different ways. And so I want to look at a couple examples. Let's go over to 1 Peter chapter 3. And here we're going to see kind of pointed out the root idea of the word having to do with something that's arranged. It's arranged in an orderly way. This is going to be disguised in the English. You're not going to see this in the English. So what I'm going to do is actually just change the English to world so that you can see where it is. And you'll see how it's translated in 1 Peter 3, 3, it says, whose world let it not be that outward uh, world of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on of apparel. And in the King James, it's translated adorning. Um, and it's referring to the orderly arrangement of such as plaiting the hair, wearing gold, or clothes. Um, and so this is the concept of an orderly arrangement of some kind, but it is the word for world. And so this is just kind of the nuance of it. And we can also do this in English where we say, you know, somebody's in their own world, or there's a whole we may walk into a building and say this is like stepping into a whole other world if it's a museum or something like that. Um, we can use the word world to describe basically the universe, or we can use it to describe society. For example, we might say, this person is worldly. And so we have some of these similar concepts. It is very similar to the way the Greek word is used, uh, but there we get an example of that nuance where it is focused on the arrangement. And in fact, we get an English word from it that deals with an orderly arrangement. The Greek word is cosmos, and the English word cosmetic comes from it. And so we see that idea. Let's go over to Acts chapter 17 and look at a different way this word is being used. And in Acts 17:24, Paul is in the middle of speaking on Mars Hill, and he says, God, um, well, let me just pick up verse 23. He says, as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore you ignorantly worship, let him I declare to you. God, who made the world and all the things in it, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. And so Paul continues, but we see this use of world, uh, really dealing with the whole world, um, uh, heaven and earth, the universe, and obviously not referring to constructing the world system, which is the use of the word we're going to focus on. Uh, we're going to focus on today and really the next few weeks as well. Uh, Hebrews chapter 11 is an example of this use of the word world, where it's not simply referring to the universe, it's not referring to the planet per se. We're specifically looking at the way society is arranged. And so we see this used of the flood of Noah. Um, in Hebrews 11:7, it says, by faith, Noah, being warned by God of things not yet seen, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. And there's also some examples in Second Peter. Now we're going to see a very clear example, a little more clear in Luke, and where it ties the foundation of the world to Abel. which is interesting. Let's look over at Luke chapter 11, and then we'll actually look at the place back in Genesis as well, or at least we'll look at what happens immediately after Cain and Abel, or after Abel anyway. Cain was still wandering around. Um, Luke 11, and let's pick up in verse 47. Jesus is speaking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and he says in verse 47 of Luke 11, "Woe to you, for you build the sepulchres of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. Truly you bear witness that you allow or approve of the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their sepulchres. Therefore also said the wisdom of God, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zacharias, who perished between the altar and the temple. Truly I say to you, it will be required of this generation." Let's look back in Genesis 4 at Abel. Let's look at Cain and Abel. Now we're familiar with the story of Cain and Abel, uh, brothers, and Cain killed his brother Abel. And I want to look back at Genesis 4 and be reminded of this, but then I specifically want to be reminded of what happened immediately after and what Cain did after killing Abel. And what's interesting is we'll see some things uh, begin, some things related to the world begin through Cain and his descendants. And so in Genesis 4, um, and let's see, let's pick up in verse 8, um, just to make a little time. Previously, we have the offering, the sacrifice. Abel's is accepted and Cain's is not. Cain is very angry about this, and we're going to see what he winds up doing because of this in verse 8. It says, "And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. And the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will not henceforth yield to you her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond you will be in the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, My perversity is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from your face I will be hidden, and I will be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it will come to pass that everyone who finds me will kill me. And the Lord said to him, Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Now, in the next couple verses, we're going to get a look at the wandering that Cain does because of this punishment. Here's the wandering. It says in verse 16, And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Nod just literally means wandering. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. Well, that doesn't sound like wandering at all. He builds a city instead. And let's take a look at his descendants, as often happens in Genesis. It starts listing a genealogy, but it mentions some things about some of his descendants. In verse 18, it says, "And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took to him two wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents and have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all, such as handle the harp and the organ. And Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And their sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And so, interesting, we see with these descendants, first of all, Cain builds a city. And of course, that's a new thing for the human race. And then his descendants start beginning some of these trades or these skills, such as the musical instruments, working with metal. And so what are we seeing here starting directly after Abel? Thank you. We have the beginning of the world, as it said in Luke 11, from the foundation of the world, from the killing of Abel, but what sort of world are we looking at? Well, we're looking at the orderly, arranged world system, the society, the human society that's being developed here. So when we look at the word world, just like in English, you want to look at this Greek word and think about the context. And one of the things we want to keep in mind is that one of the important ways it's used in the New Testament is speaking really of world, as in, we would say worldly as an adjective. In the New Testament, it's looking at the arranged human society of the world, and how it is arranged. And as we can see a glimpse of here in Genesis 4, there's a number of things about the world and about the way it's organized. The world has a number of things to offer, everything from careers, skills, technology, like we see here with working metal, to entertainment and the arts, such as music. We can also see from the New Testament, the world kind of has its own schools of thought, its own wisdom. If we look over at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we can see some things said about the world's wisdom. Verse 18 says, "For the preaching of the cross is to those who perish foolishness, or to those who are perishing foolishness, but to us who are saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world?" And so uh, we see here it speak of the wisdom of the world, which, as we can see, is not really going to allow you to arrive at this conclusion. For verse 21 says, after that in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom did not know God, it pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save those who believe. So we see here mentioned the wisdom of the world. We also see the disputer of the age, just to make this point. And if you're using King James, you may see this where the King James may translate the word age, world. It's not world, it's age. And so we actually get an example of this here in verse 20. It has its own principles, its own elementary principles over in Colossians chapter 2. And there's a lot of positional truth in this passage, speaking of who we are in Christ, what God counts to be true of us in Christ. And when it comes to the world and how this affects our relationship to the world, let's pick up in verse 20. Colossians 2:20 says, wherefore, assuming you died with Christ from the rudiments of the world, or the elementary principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, are you subject to ordinances, touch not, taste not, handle not, which are all to perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines or teachings of men. And so the world has its own wisdom, its own principles um, to deal with how people are to live. And if we think about the purposes of the world system, think about the timing of it. When did Cain go out and build a city and his descendants begin to do these things? It was immediately after the first murder. And one of the things that we'll look at in the next couple sessions in First John is we'll actually see that the ruler of the world system uh, is Satan, and that he is the one that has been given that authority. And so uh, today we're going to characterize some of the things of the world, and I'll try to describe it a little bit and describe some of the things mentioned in verse 16 back in First John, um, such as the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and so on. But one of the things we're going to look at is as we get deeper and deeper into looking at the world and looking at its future and looking at how it affects Christians, the purposes of the world system. It provides a way for the unsaved to live in an organized manner. For the unsaved, really the world system is often the only method at their disposal to deal with their sin nature. And that's one of the major purposes that Satan was behind, making sure that the world system was set up in such a way that people like Cain would have some incentive to not simply go and murder their brother whenever they became outraged about something. And we see that touched on here in Colossians 2. Uh, it says, we died with Christ from the elements of the world system. And Paul asks, why are you still behaving as if you're subject uh, to its ordinances? Because we have a method for dealing with our sin nature that the unsaved do not, that is infinitely better than anything the world system could provide. But the world system provides a framework for living, so that humans are not simply completely left to their own devices. One of the other purposes of the world system, and this relates to the fact it's a spiritual enemy for the Christian, it can serve as a distraction. It can provide something to live for. It can provide a set of goals and objectives, things that are not uh, the same as God's goals. Uh, and obviously, it promotes an independence from God as well. Well, let's take a look at 1 John 2:16 again, because I want to, he gives a quick, he lists three things. He gives a quick list. After what we've been doing in Galatians 5, I hesitate to call it a list, but it is a short list. And I want to actually look at some of the things here and focus on describing, using what's said here in verse 16 to describe the world a little bit. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. And so John makes the point that the source of these things is the world, and it's not the Father. And we're going to look at the importance of love in a future lesson. And this is the point made in verse 15. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And so you can imagine, obviously, this is an important thing to understand. We're not to love the world. Let me just go ahead and say something really quickly about love. We'll focus on this either next time or the time after next. But agape love, you're putting something ahead of yourself, even to the point of being self-sacrificial if necessary. Something else has the higher priority. You're not simply fond of it, you don't simply like it, you're actually prioritizing it ahead of yourself. You're putting it first. And that's what happens with agape love, the love described in verse 15. And so John's point is going to be, if you're directing that to the world, you're loving the world, you're putting that ahead of yourself. It's not actually possible to be putting the Father ahead of yourself, because they're mutually exclusive in that way. Again, the things of the world, the things that the world would have you to prioritize, such as the things in verse 16, the things the world would have you love and strive after, those are not from the Father. And so that is his point in verse 16, that these things are from the world. The world is their source, didn't come from the Father. And so if you're loving those things, you're not loving the Father. And again, we'll focus on the implications of love in a future lesson, because this really is the major danger for the Christian, is to cause their agape love to be misdirected, to be distracted by the things in the world, which like to at least give the appearance of things that are worthy of of your love or worthy of you prioritizing and giving importance. And it winds up being instead of uh, loving the Father, and sometimes that can be subtle enough for a Christian to not realize that that is what's happening. So let's look at verse 16 and the things in here. Uh, the desire of the flesh. And again, the word translated lust here is a general word for a strong desire, um, a general word. The desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, and the pride of life. We'll talk about that last in a little bit. The desire of the flesh. Already kind of touched on this, the fact that the world system, for a lot of unbelievers, is sometimes the only thing providing them anything to deal with the flesh. But what's interesting is that instead of what we have, and let's turn over to Galatians 5, instead of what we have as Christians, what are we told in Galatians chapter 5 related to the flesh? We're told in verse 16 of Galatians 5, this I say then, walk by the Spirit, and you will never, ever complete the desire from the flesh. And this is in contrast to the world system because John just mentioned one of the things in the world is the desire from the flesh. And so the world does not try to eliminate those things. The world tries to make use of them. A lot of times the world will try to channel the sin nature as best it can. And obviously, some individuals have more success than others in subscribing to channeling the sin nature. Some of the unsaved are still really dominated by their sin nature, and some of the unsaved are more dominated by the world system and how it makes use of the flesh and other things. But you will see this in the world, um, and you can again scan through this list of works of the flesh in 19 through 21 of Galatians 5, and you see at least some of these things the world will kind of try to appeal to a little bit. It'll try to, you'll see it in marketing, you'll see it in entertainment, that the world will make use of the fact that some of these things are appealing. And a couple of these things, the world may just flat out encourage, like zeal, for instance. Um, if you're in the world of sports, for example, especially if you're playing sports, zeal is very much encouraged. It's called competitiveness often, but you're encouraged to, if somebody has the drive to outdo all the other competitors in the field, that's admired in sports, and it's admired because it often produces somebody who does in fact outdo a lot of the other competitors in their field. Um, and so the world system does very much make use of uh, this in nature. And it's in contrast to what the Christian is to do. The Christian uh, is dead to their sin nature. If we look down at Galatians 5:24, verse 24 says, "And those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and strong desires." And that the passions would be even stronger than the strong desires. It would be uh, you develop some sort of attachment, or it's something that you want so badly it hurts. It hurts not to have it. Um, Sometimes you might deal with somebody, or you might have dealt with wanting something that badly, where you go from trying to get it because it feels good to trying to get it because not having it feels bad. So this whole range though, whatever it is, passions or strong desires of those who are Christ have crucified the flesh along with its passions and strong desires. So our approach is different from the approach of the world to the sin nature. And that's another reason back in Colossians 2, Paul said, why are you acting as if you're still subject to the ordinances of the world? Because one of the major purposes of the ordinances of the world is to deal with the sin nature. You have no need of that as a Christian. And let's see over in Ephesians 2 the fact that this was, in fact, our situation before we were saved. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 says, and you has he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which in the past you walked according to the age of this world, according to the ruler of the authority of the air, the spirit that now works in the sons of disobedience. And I mentioned earlier that the world system has a ruler, and we see that here, the ruler of the authority of the air, among whom we also had our conduct in times past in the lusts of our flesh, the strong desires of our flesh, fulfilling the wishes, the desirous will of the flesh and the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as others. But God, who is rich in mercy for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in trespasses, has made us alive together with Christ. By grace you are saved, and has raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenlies in Christ Jesus, that in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace in his kindness towards us through Christ Jesus. And so again, we see with the unsaved and with us when we were unsaved, this was the situation that we used to walk according to the age of this world. Now, we even do have a verse that talks about worldly strong desires or worldly lusts over in Titus chapter 2 and verse 12. I'll start in verse 11. Titus 2:11 says, for the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. And so we see there worldly lusts mentioned. And let's look at, I need to hurry. We have two more things to look at. Back in 1 John 2:16, we've looked at desires from the flesh, the strong desires of the eyes. Let's go back over to the Old Testament. Let's look back at Genesis again. If we go to Genesis chapter 3 and we look at the temptation of Eve in the garden, we'll actually see the eyes mentioned when it talks about the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Genesis 3:1, it says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, yes, has God said, you will not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden says, you shall not eat of it. And so that is, of course, actually what God had told. He told Adam, you cannot eat the fruit of this one tree. And then Eve adds, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And so God already told them what would happen. He told them that they would die if they ate it. And the serpent contradicts. The serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows in the day you eat of it, then your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil." And that is the name of the tree the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in verse 6 it says, "And when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit of it and ate, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat." And it's interesting that a tree to be desired to make one wise, but the other two are not very logical. The tree is good for food. The whole garden is full of trees that are good for food. And then we have, it was pleasant to the eyes. It appealed to the eyes in some way. Now, neither of those, at least in this case, are logical reasons. But we see from the beginning, from Satan's first recorded interaction with human beings, that the eyes and how attractive something was or how it appealed to the eyes was a factor. And so we see this from the beginning. And let's also look over at Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Um, and here we'll have Solomon say something interesting uh, regarding the world. And obviously, to keep a couple things in mind, that this is a different dispensation, and also very importantly, uh, this is not a description of Solomon in a very good place, um, as far as his relationship to God is concerned. And we're going to see here, and I'm just going to read the first several verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Solomon really is complaining in the whole book, really, pretty much. And in this passage, he's talking about his involvement with the world as the king and his dissatisfaction with it. And so in verse 1, it says, "I said in my heart, go now, I will prove you uh, with mirth, and therefore enjoy pleasure. This also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what does it do? I sought in my heart to give myself to wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men, what they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. I made great works, I built myself houses, I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them for all kinds of fruit. I made myself pools of water to water the wood that brings forth trees. I got myself servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house. Also, I had great possessions of great and small cattle, beyond all who were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered myself also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and the provinces. I got myself men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. And so I was great and increased more than all who were before me in Jerusalem, and also my wisdom remained with me." And this verse is the reason we're here in verse 10. He says, "And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. And then I looked on all the works that my hands had worked, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun." And so, just an interesting perspective um, from somebody who really, just about as much as anybody in his day, had access to anything the world system could have offered. Uh, his wisdom and his wealth were famous. And he says in verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Still doesn't seem to have made him happy, though. And obviously, at this point, he is not really in a right relationship with God as a Jew. And we can see the effect of that um, because if he was, then he wouldn't be relying on those things for his happiness or his well-being. But we see that the eyes definitely play a role with the world system causing us to desire things, um, things that are appealing to the eyes. And finally, we have, oh goodness, the last item on the list, uh, the pride of life. This really refers to, let me expand this a little bit. Uh, Pride as this isn't the normal word for pride. This is a word for, um, and it's not the normal word for boasting. It's a word for boasting or swagger that it overestimates itself or it oversells what it actually is. It's a presumptuous swagger or arrogant boasting um, of life, of physical life. Um, and this is another thing common with the world dealing with, it really deals with physical life. Um, and this particular word deals with physical life. It also deals with the means of physical life. We can actually turn over to chapter 3, verse 17 in First John. 1 John 3:17. And we see this word used again uh, where John says, but whoever has this world's life, and I just simply translated it life so you see the word. Um, Better translated, at least the way I see it in the English here in the King James, whoever has this world's good, whoever has this world's goods or means. And so the word can be used of the physical life or of the means for physical life. It's also the word Jesus uses it of the widow's mite when the widow puts in her 2 coins and that's all that she has. And he says she gave her whole life, her whole physical life. And so I believe it's translated livelihood, which is getting the sense of it. 1 John 3:17, though, says, whoever has this world's life, livelihood, physical means, and sees his brother have need and shuts up his compassion from him, how does the love of God dwell in him? And so the world also deals with this, the pride, the swagger, the presumptuous arrogance of life, of this physical life and the things related to physical life, things like money and food and possessions as well, the means for it. And sometimes just the physical life itself. Sometimes people take pride in um, they take pride in these things and they boast about them when, of course, uh, the whole thing is uh, passing away, as it says in verse 17, along with its strong desires. But he who does the will of God abides forever. And so this morning we're looking at characterizing the world a little bit and understanding some of the things in the world and some of the kinds of things in the world. And what we're going to look at in the next couple sessions is um, one of the things we'll look at is what is actually the effect of directing agape love to these things, like John points out in verse 15. What's the effect of that on a Christian? And what should we actually be directing agape love towards?